November 2016. The CBS television network broadcast an episode of the Dr. Phil show. In the middle of a brightly lit studio, a 67-year-old woman appeared. She wore a faded t-shirt. Her hair was sparse, falling out in patches. Her eyes were wide open, darting constantly in an unconscious panic. She looked directly into the camera lens and said, "I am very sick. I need help." That was Shelley Duvall. 36 years prior, her terrified face had become a pop culture icon. The scene where she wielded a kitchen knife, backing up the stairs in the face of Jack Torrance's madness in The Shining, was hailed by academia as the pinnacle of horror art. But what the world witnessed in that 2016 moment was not acting. It was a lasting trauma. The American television machine immediately turned this tragedy into a vaudeville act. They exploited her paranoia for views. She believed that her co-star Robin Williams was still alive in the form of a shape-shifting entity. She claimed there were listening devices implanted in her leg. The media called it the ruin of a movie star. But absolutely no major newspaper dared to point directly to the root scene that broke this woman's nervous system. They refused to turn back time to Elstree Studios in London, England in 1979, where a 500-day filming process turned into a systematic physiological torture chamber. Look at the famous staircase scene, 127 takes for a single scene, a Guinness World Record for the most retakes for a spoken scene. To meet the director's demands, Shelley Duvall had to maintain a state of screaming, crying, and shaking continuously for 12 hours a day, for weeks on end. We are not talking about emotions. We are talking about biological reactions. When a human being is forced to be constantly terrified, the adrenal glands pump out a massive amount of stress hormones. A state of cortisol overload occurs. Put simply, Shelley's brain was forced to believe that she was truly facing death, repeated hundreds of times. The body's natural defense mechanism was completely shattered. She was so exhausted that her tears ran dry, forcing her to continuously drink large bottles of water between takes just so her body had enough fluids to keep crying. Her vocal cords were shattered. Her hair began falling out in clumps due to an autoimmune response to extreme stress. This was not dedication to art. This was physical destruction meticulously scheduled on a production board. On screen, the audience shudders at the authenticity of the character, Wendy Torrance. But that authenticity was bought with the real-life nervous breakdown of the woman who played her. A sacrifice wrapped in the velvet of cinematic technique, bringing fame to the man in charge and leaving the victim to gnaw on wounds that would never heal. May 23rd, 1980. The Shining was officially released in North America. Initially, the film met with indifference from critics, but the Hollywood industrial machine never abandons a gold mine. With a budget of $19 million, the film grossed over $47 million at the domestic box office. Over time, it was repositioned as a great masterpiece. Alongside the revenue, a canonization campaign was launched by the Studio Alliance. All the glory was funneled toward a single name, director Stanley Kubrick. The trade press built him up as an auteur, the sole cinematic engineer, a genius pursuing perfectionism. When you slap the label genius on a man holding power, all abusive behavior is instantly rationalized as a working method. Cruelty is romanticized as the rigorousness necessary to reach the pinnacle of art. To maintain this perfect illusion, the power system needed a villain, or at least an inferior figure, to highlight the director's greatness. They chose Shelley Duvall. The mass brainwashing strategy began. Behind-the-scenes materials, including the documentary Making The Shining, directed by Kubrick's own daughter, intentionally edited footage of Shelley to portray her as a weak actress who constantly made mistakes, argued, and needed to be shaped by the great director with iron discipline. Audiences were manipulated into believing that without Kubrick's brutal coercion, Duvall would not have delivered the performance of a lifetime. They deliberately erased her professional history. The masses were made to forget that just 3 years prior, in 1977, Shelley Duvall stood on the podium at the Cannes Film Festival. She held the Best Actress award for her complex role in Three Women by director Robert Altman. She was not a lifeless puppet. She was an outstanding talent, someone capable of independently exploring the psychological depths of a character without needing anyone to abuse her to elicit emotion. But on the Elstree set, Kubrick did not need a collaborator. He needed a victim. An unspoken directive, yet an absolute command, was issued from the director's chair. Completely isolate Shelley Duvall. Kubrick forbade the entire film crew, including lead actor Jack Nicholson, from showing any sympathy or offering comfort to her. Emotional blockade strategy? In layman's terms, they threw her into an empty room devoid of oxygen, locked the door, and stood outside, watching her suffocate to capture the most beautiful frames. She had to wrestle with nervous breakdowns in the middle of a film set with hundreds of people, yet as cold as a morgue. The pinnacle of injustice came in 1981 at the very first Golden Raspberry Awards, when Shelley Duvall's performance, full of blood and tears, was nominated for Worst Actress. The system didn't just drain her vitality, they spat on her on-screen survival efforts. It took 4 decades for the organization to retract that inhumane nomination. But by that time, the damage was permanent. Hollywood's golden illusion had succeeded in turning organized abuse into a mythological tale of the creative process. Let's start with the numbers on paper. Spring 1978. The initial contract stipulated a filming schedule for The Shining of 17 weeks. A standard schedule. But the industrial machine controlled by Kubrick did not operate according to ordinary civil agreements. Those 17 weeks were absurdly stretched to 500 days. For over a year, the cast was kept under house arrest at Elstree Studios. For the power system of that era, an actor's time was merely a consumable supply. Every morning, Shelley Duvall received a new stack of scripts. The paper colors were constantly changed to mark revised drafts. She memorized lines, built psychological states, and prepared to step onto the set. Then, by early afternoon, those pages were torn up. The script changed again. Academia calls this cognitive destabilization. Simply put, the manipulator constantly changes the rules of the game while you are playing, stripping away all your anchors to reality, leaving you in a state of perpetual confusion, doubting your own memory and abilities. Shelley was stripped of her control over the character. She was not allowed to act. She was forced to react. And to completely break the victim's resistance, a strategy of absolute information blockade was established on set. The director ordered the entire crew of hundreds, from cameramen and lighting technicians to the makeup department. No one was allowed to converse with, sympathize with, or share anything with Duvall. If she cried, ignore her. If she collapsed, let her lie there. They created an emotionally sterile environment, a vacuum filter isolating this woman among hundreds of people. When a living organism is pushed into a state of continuous survival stress, the sympathetic nervous system activates the fight or flight mode. Heart rate skyrockets. Blood vessels constrict. The stomach stops digesting. Shelley Duvall had to maintain this red alert state for 500 days. She suffered severe weight loss. Her body began to consume itself to maintain the energy for endless screaming. They stood behind the monitors, recording that exhaustion. Film capitalists did not see a human being gasping for air. They only saw priceless footage. The descent of an individual was the raw material for this machine to produce a masterpiece, a Guinness record, 127 takes. That is not a proud achievement. It is the field report of a medical assault. Let's analyze the staircase scene from a physiological perspective. In that scene, Shelley swung a baseball bat, crying and backing away in sheer terror, over and over, 10 times, 50 times, then 100 times. Her trachea was swollen from the friction of screaming breaths. Her eyes were bone dry. By the 100th take, her body's water reserves were depleted. Tears could no longer fall because her tear glands had gone on strike. She had to tilt her head back and gulp down bottles of purified water between the director yelling, "Cut!" just so her brain could force her body to produce mechanical tears. Her muscles ached, her hands shook, and her hair fell out in droves due to the interruption of the hair follicle growth cycle under extreme stress. By the 127th take, the collapse was complete. The wild, desperate look on screen was no longer an acting technique. It was the silent cry for help of a completely shattered nervous system. And the man in charge had achieved his ultimate goal. When The Shining wrapped, the film was carefully packaged for theatrical release. So, how did the Studio Alliance handle the crime scene? They executed a ruthless liquidation process. No social safety net was deployed. Simply put, The studio provided absolutely no psychological support packages or medical recovery regimens for the actors after the project ended. The contract was terminated. The door slammed shut. The end. Shelley Duvall took her battered body and a mind full of ghosts back to Texas, trying to retreat from Hollywood's toxic light. The cover-up began. For decades, mainstream media was complicit in maintaining silence. They were busy writing essays praising the smooth, Steadicam techniques, analyzing the hidden messages in the Overlook Hotel's carpet patterns. No one in academia bothered to ask about the price paid in the leading lady's flesh and blood. This calculated ignorance was how the corporate machine protected itself from moral accusations. It wasn't until 2016, when her paranoia had progressed to its worst stage, that the entertainment industry extended its octopus tentacles to find her. The Dr. Phil show didn't put her on the air to treat her. They dragged her out of a hiding, just to siphon the last scraps of tragedy, turning her madness into a profitable television spectacle. They whitewashed the crimes of the past, playing the role of benefactors, when in reality, that very machine was what indirectly pushed her into the abyss 36 years ago. 2018, the Library of Congress officially inducted The Shining into the National Film Registry. They slapped an eternal label on the film, culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Academia raised a glass in celebration. Millions of fans continued to dissect every perfect frame by Stanley Kubrick. The film had become an untouchable cinematic legacy. But that legacy is stolen property. It was swiped from the very life, health, and mind of Shelley Duvall. For 4 decades, the global content distribution system has reaped enormous profits from rebroadcasting a scene of a woman being psychologically driven to her death. Let's call this phenomenon by its true name. In clinical psychology, it's called cognitive dissociation, simply meaning when a human is pushed to the point of unbearable pain, the brain automatically disconnects from reality so the body can continue to survive. Global audiences paid to watch that dissociation, and the entertainment industrial machine gleefully packaged a nervous breakdown into a horror masterpiece. Kubrick got a statue. Meanwhile, Duvall was erased from the history of the very work she traded her blood for. The most prestigious cinematic essays never noted that Wendy Torrance's panic on screen was not the result of artistic sublimation, but the residue of systematic abuse. Film capitalists succeeded in brainwashing the public with a toxic belief that as long as the final product is excellent, no matter how cruel the scene that created it was, it will be forgiven. This calculated ignorance turns everyone who praises the film, while dismissing the actor's pain, into accomplices. We buy t-shirts printed with her panicked face. We turn her distorted smile, chattering teeth, and desperate eyes into memes that scroll across our phone screens every day. In reality, there were no supernatural forces at the Overlook Hotel. There was only a cold corporate machine, ready to wring dry an individual's nervous system and then resell those real tears at the highest ticket price. Shelley Duvall lost her career, her mental health, and even her autonomy in the final years of her life. But the most brutal thing is, the power system robbed her of the right to tell the truth. They forced her to play the mad woman so they could be the geniuses. Next time you turn on the screen and watch Wendy Torrance swing the baseball bat on the staircase, remember this well. You are not watching an actor embodying a role. You are stepping into a crime scene underwritten by the glorious light of Hollywood. And the heart-wrenching scream you hear is absolutely not art. It is the sound of a human being broken, left to rot in a world that is eternally cruel.